if you did a Linux install or a Solaris install or a Windows install, you answer a couple of questions. When you're done, you give it a license number and you start NerveCenter. The scripts, the installers, the setups are all rewritten now so that it just asks you a couple of questions: where you want it, do you have enough space, and it goes and installs now. So there's nothing to the installation. I intend to start a NerveCenter client and show you a few of the facets of the client. I have my server selected in the address box at the top, and I've closed all of the windows except the client. We're looking at just a clean client situation. Across the top, I have these different pull-downs for client, for server, for admin, for the window, for the view. And here's the help I was talking about, the help topics, and you'll see that we're all about NerveCenter. I have a table of contents, and once I hit for the table of contents here, I have the ability to search, and I can do a keyword search. Something like NC Server, and it will pull up the different pieces that show it, and when I click on them, I get the full display on the right-hand side as to what the information is about it, with links and everything else. So that's the online help. Notice, though, all of these pull-downs, like server or admin, all of these are right here. Here's your property group. Here's your node list. Here's your polling list. We have icons for them. So there's two ways to get at them. You can go to admin and look at the property group, or you can go to the property group and see the same stuff. Server, connect, disconnect, auto connect, server status. Over here, if I do this, I am doing a server connect, and I can go to the list of servers that I have ever connected to, choose one, give it the username and password, and connect. Or I can go here and I can do a server connect. I get to the same place. If I were to select, let's say, this 50 IP address, and I now click on the red disconnect, I am disconnecting from that server, and I say OK, it's now no longer in my list, so I have disconnected. So I can get to all of these things from two places. Admin, alarm definition list opens all the alarms that are currently defined on my system. So I can get to them all. Property groups, node list, the list of polls that have been written on my machine. They're all turned on. They are either suppressible or not. They have a property associated with them or not, no prop. And they have a base object. Those are the polling list. The masks, trap masks that are written on my machine. The name, whether it's turned on, they're all turned on. It doesn't get anything done unless there is a pending transition in an alarm that is turned on. So that's the masks. The alarms, again, the alarm definition list. The severity list. NerveCenter comes with a set of severities. They range from 0 through 12 on the default. They have a NerveCenter name. They have a group that they are associated with, and that group is actually a management platform association. And that association is contained in the platform name list next to it. So in NerveCenter, a normal severity has a severity level of 0. It belongs to the fault group, and its platform name is normal. If you notice, under platform name, there are only 5 types of informs: normal, warning, minor, major, and critical. That is because platforms like OpenView are limited. They only know about those 5 platform names of severity. NerveCenter can have hundreds of severities. We can go in here and create our own to be used for our behavioral models so that it means a very specific thing to us. If I were working on some special web type of device, I might want to go in here and create some severity levels for the web-specific devices that were grouped in a web group as opposed to traffic or fault, and assign certain platform names so that the platform would know about them. And when they were displayed in the alarm summary, we would know that they are web-based because they would have names associated with the web stuff, and we would see them. We'll see how to add some severities later, but we can add the severities that we want. Many customers do this. The next are Perl subroutines. If you have a set of Perl subroutines compiled, they list here. Notice that with a default NerveCenter installation, there is this SS-ICMP error Perl subroutine that has been written. It is part of the standard default, and this is the Perl subroutine. Very simple. It makes a couple of declarations. It checks to see if the interface type is the IC type is a 3 and the code is a 3. If you know anything about NL-ping and ICMP responses on the network, you'll know that this is a 3.3 is a IC code, UC type and UC code status for an ICMP ping. There are others possible, and you can rewrite this to account for those. But this is a simple Perl subroutine that's here. Action router rules. Here is where we write an action router rule. We can import an object, and this is where we can go get those models that NerveCenter sends in its default. We go to Browse, and here are those main categories. The category of authentication, the authentication model is there. Let's go up. The open service, the collector of events. This is the event collector model for informs over to NerveCenter. Let's go back up. The database input, the DBI. We have an interface log to database model here. So here is where they are. We can look at them. We can choose them. Node status, upstream, downstream. ICMP echo. This is a model. How do I input it? I select it. I say open. I say OK. And it tells me that that input behavioral model was input to this server. It was put in there, and it's all set. How do I know? Let me go look at my alarm, and my alarm should have a new one in here. It's this one here. This new model was just input to the server. This is an alarm definition that we're looking at. Let's take a look at a simple one. This is probably the most simple alarm definition you will find. The two-state, one transition off of ground to a state, and then a looping transition on the destination state, looping on the same thing that got us there. We will be using this a lot. This is the simplest approach to getting something done. Why do we do it this way? Quite simply, I can loop on ground, no doubt about it. I can build a model that has a looping transition on ground, but I will never see it in memory. If a model is in ground, it does not show in the alarm summary. Only when the model has been taken out of ground and moved to a state that is holding does it get put into memory and displayed for me to see in this alarm summary view. Now notice I don't have any here quite yet. Let's see if I can go make it do something for me. We'll turn that on. Nope, wrong one. Let me turn that off. Let me turn it on. I now have these 3 alarms in memory. As soon as I turned on the alarm, all of the other components that I had built were on. There became valid transitions pending, and therefore the triggers fired them. And when they fired, it moved to a state. That state being permanent caused it to go into memory. Let's take a look at the first entry. It's a very simple model. It comes off of ground on a single transition to a state called lab 4 trap, and it loops on lab 4 trap gen. Notice I have multiple entries. That's what this list down below here is telling me. I can elongate this and take a look at it, get these fields out here so that I can see all the lengths, names, just by double-clicking on that. I've highlighted the first one. It shows me in red up here what transition that relates to. I highlight the second one. It shows me in the above diagram the transition that relates to. So I can track how it works through memory. Did it work? What state did it get hung at? Is it at a state? Where is it? Notice in the lower left-hand corner I have a refresh button. If I hit the refresh button, it's going to refresh the history list and show me that I have in fact created 2 additional transitions. The first one is still there, the second one, now the third one, and now the fourth one. And the second, third, and fourth are all in that looping transition. And every time it goes through the loop, it fires the trigger, goes out, comes back in, and puts another entry into the history list. I can keep track of how many times this does this. I can do all kinds of things here. The alarm summary shows us what's going on in memory for every alarm that is in memory and its current state. Notice the refresh has happened again. Now there's a 5th transition. Let's expand the time field. Anybody notice anything about the time? The first 2 happened instantly, didn't they? At the same time. I fired a trigger that took me off of ground, and at the same time I sent a trap. So I caused the first and the second to transition to happen almost simultaneously. Then, 46 seconds later, it transitioned again. And another 46 seconds, it transitioned again. And another 46 seconds, it transitioned again. What do you think is going on? I bet I have a timer in that transition that's looping that says every 46 seconds fire a new trigger. And the trigger that it's going to fire is called Lab 4 Trap Gen, so that it's going to run through its loop again. And in that transition, I bet I have the action that says to send a trap to the list of nodes in my node list. Let's take a look. If I double-click, what do I have? I have a fire trigger with Lab 4 Trap Gen. That's the name of the trigger. I'm using the standard sub-object. I'm using the default $ node name. I'm using the $ property that is default, and I've given it a time of 45 seconds. So every 45 seconds, it's going to fire this trigger, send a trap, and reset the trigger to fire again. I'm using NerveCenter to generate traps to test NerveCenter. Here's my send trap operation. I built a custom trap with a generic number of 6 and a specific number of 40 with an enterprise ID of 1316141999999, and I've given it a certain set of var binds, specific attributes and things that I want to send attached to the trap. The value is Acme Hub-O-Matic. The Hub-O-Matic Ethernet 1 and interface 1 with 32. Well, what does that mean? Instance interface input errors is the attribute here on the IF entry table. So I can say now that the interface input errors on instance 1, which is interface 1, has a value of 32. I'm basically telling you that interface 1 has seen 32 errors. I built this with NerveCenter. NerveCenter to test NerveCenter. These are the kinds of things that NerveCenter has the ability to do. Send its own traps to itself to set things up with all kinds of specific information, including varbines. So we've now seen the input. This is the export. If I want to export something, I can give it a name. I can select whether I want to export a node. If it's a node file, I got here a name called test. I can select the one that I want to export and move it over to the list. Notice up here, export the objects to a selected server. If I had another server, one of my remote or lights out NerveCenter servers that I had wanted to export something to, here's where I would do it. I would come to this list and I would select whether it was a node, an alarm, a poll. I would select the server. I would have to be connected to it, and then I would select it. And then I could export it from one server to the next, all with point and click. And this is where it's done. Exporting objects. And then these are the summary, the alarm summary and the aggregate summary. The alarm summary shows you the summary, like I have at the top, for the one and only one server that you have over here in this box. It's the same here. If I go to the aggregate, it tells me that it's an aggregate summary, and if I happen to have 3 servers that I was managing and that I was connected to, and each of them had 3 alarms, I would now see all of the alarms aggregated over here across all 3 servers, so that I can look at all my servers that I am connected to at one time in one display. I can drill down into any of them, just like I did the last one, look at the fire triggers, or find all the transitions, etc. By the way, this history list only goes to 20. Right now it happens to be at 12. When it hits 21, the first one gets dropped off and the next one stays in place. So if you need to do that, you need to chase it sooner than later sometimes. I prefer to look at the alarm summary and know that I am focused on the host that I am connected to up here in this window. So that is a quick walk through the NerveCenter client. And the creation of the new alarm is just like this. We're going to start with this blank window, and we are going to create the transitions and the states. And it's quite simple. If I want to add a state, I click on that little blue oval in the upper left-hand corner, and I give it the name, and I choose a severity, and I say OK, and I now have a new state here called test. And when I want to create a transition between ground and test, I will go here to the second, which is called Add Transition, and I select from ground state to the testing state, and then in this list I will select the name of the trigger that I wrote specific for this instance. If you notice, in this list are all of the triggers available to the server. I'm not going to use everybody else's because I don't know what they do specifically. I might be able to, because I've used NerveCenter a little bit, fix some of them or use some of them. But most likely I'm going to go in and create my own. So to do that, I've got to go back out of here and create my own in either a mask, by creating a new mask and giving it simple trigger and giving it a name, Steve. So you saw how I started to fill it in? I chose something, I did a couple of things, filtered on enterprise, and then I chose a simple trigger. When I do save and save for the second time, I can now go over here and there is a transition called Steve because I created that transition. And I can use it to go from ground to test, and I say OK, and now I have started to create a behavioral model by creating the trigger name. In this case, I used my name Steve, and I have added it to my list and selected it to create my transition. What does a Steve transition do for me? If I right-click on it, it comes from a mask. And the mask's name is test, and I can open that mask and I can see that it is a link up mask. It's waiting for any enterprise, because there's no enterprise OID filled in, any enterprise link up, and when it gets it, it's going to fire the trigger called Steve. That trigger will happen, and when it does, it will take me from ground to test on the trigger Steve. We'll double click on this and we can go down here to the new actions and we can select from this list of actions to take on the transition. This is known as the transition action list. I can beep, I can fire an event log, I can fire a trigger, I can log to file, and when I choose something like log to file, I get the ability to steve.log, give it the name of the file, and use default data if I wish, but if I don't, I can create the symbols that I want to put into it, piece by piece, whichever thing I feel is appropriate in this list. The number of varbines. I can create the format of the log file for me so that you can have specific information. If not, blank it all out with a backspace, select default, say OK, and save it. And now all of that information is saved to the database flat file for usage by the rest of the computer, by the rest of the server. You do everything you need to do to build in the client. The client is your most powerful utility. It has all the tools, all the pieces.